Well, Andrew Tate joins me again now. Andrew, good to see you.
Salam alaikum, Piers.
Good to see you. I've genuinely been amazed by the reaction I've had in the streets. Not just here, but I went to Qatar for the World Cup, had the same thing there. A lot of people coming up about Cristiano Ronaldo, obviously, but also a lot of people coming up about you. And they were almost exclusively men, young men, who genuinely see you as a role model, as somebody who inspires them, as somebody they want to be like.
Yep.
So it made me think, the first interview you had was quite combative. The second time, a shorter interview, less so. I want to try and work out, in this one, who you are, because it struck me as extraordinary that Google this week revealed some stats for the year. The number one person whose name followed people Google searching who is in 2022 was Andrew Tate.
Yeah, that's quite remarkable. I think there's a whole swath of the population, especially young men, that feel disenfranchised. They feel disenfranchised with the media machine and the things they're supposed to believe. They don't feel an affinity with the educational systems or the culture. And they look at a person like me who stands up and says the things that many young men think. I haven't put a magic spell on the world. The fact that people like what I say means that they agree with me deep inside. They may be afraid to say it themselves, but I am seen as a bastion of free speech and a bastion for masculinity as a whole, because a lot of men are largely forgotten about.
Do you think you're a force for good, or are you a force in evolution where perhaps you've done and said stuff you shouldn't have done, and as you get older, perhaps as you get bigger, more followed around the world, you sense a responsibility perhaps you didn't have early on?
Well, we all evolve. Every human evolves day by day. You wouldn't be human if you didn't evolve on an hour-by-hour basis. But I do not think I'm a force for good. I absolutely not really know I'm a force for good, because I'm a force for truth. And truth is a good thing. Without truth, we're going to end up in absolute tyranny and slavery, and we're already on our way there. I feel like we're starting to combat it. My cancellation was the beginning of a change in public consciousness. Elon having Twitter is another beginning of the change in public consciousness. And anybody who stands up and speaks what they truly believe, even if it's something I don't personally agree with, I think that truth is absolutely important. And people's personal truths and people's personal opinions, even on differing sides of the same opinion, should be heard.
Tell me about your life. You were born to a mixed race couple. Your father was an African-American, a chess player. And your mother, she was from this country.
Correct, yeah. So my father was black chess player. He was in the Air Force. He met my mother here in England. And then I was raised initially in the United States. And then I moved to Luton, England when I was younger. So I've moved around a lot. I've lived an eclectic life in many different scenarios. We've moved around. I've done a lot of different things, lived a lot of different experiences. And
what
I'm
nationality are you? I mean, what do you identify as?
I consider myself British now, but I will say that part of me, the patriotic Brit inside of me, is devastated by the state of the UK currently, and I want to make that very clear. The patriotic Brit in me truly loves this country, and seeing what's happening to it, especially to our major cities, is almost heartbreaking to watch in real time.
In what way?
It's falling apart. This is a failed society. By every metric you can possibly measure, it is absolutely and utterly failing. The cost of living crisis, the crime rates, everything is falling apart. If you compare it to a country like the United Arab Emirates, you compare it to a city like Dubai, London, which should be the greatest city on earth, is failing in absolutely every metric because our leadership is a joke. If you look at Dubai and the UAE, the leadership there is so flawless, so genuinely genius. They saw ahead and have built almost a utopia. And then you look at London, you can't even walk around with a watch on. It's disgusting.
You know, it's very interesting. I was in Qatar for the World Cup. Obviously, a lot of people in England taking a very censorious moral view about the World Cup being in the Middle East at all because of their laws against homosexuality, because of their treatment of migrant workers. I've got to say, not that I don't share the concerns about those things, of course I do, but I found a lot of the virtue signalling, and I think that's what it was in many cases, about the whole region actually quite distasteful. Because when I was in Qatar, I thought the World Cup was fantastically well run, incredibly good experience. But a lot of Qataris were saying to me, you know, there's this weird, quaint feeling back in your country that we all want to aspire to behave like that we all want to live in a country with massive drug problems, with massive knife crime issues, with scenes like the European Championships final where it's complete lawlessness going on, where stuff like the NHS, the system of healthcare, is basically collapsing, where the education system is dropping behind, so on and so on and so on. And it's a really interesting perspective. They were like, I know you all think that we want to have your form of democracy and your form of life, but actually we're fine, thanks.
Absolutely, because it's a failed society and it's godless. I think it's disgusting. We leave our old people to rot in old people's homes, and then we sit there and say we don't have enough money for nurses. I understand this nurse strike very well and how frustrating it can be if you walk into a hospital and the nurse is not prepared to work. But the nurses would be prepared to work at the current wage if they believed this country was spending its money prudently. When you see this country spending its money and just absolutely wasting it, pulling it out of thin air to fund proxy wars, God knows where, that has nothing to do with them. Of course, as a nurse, you're going to stand up and say, well, can't I get a pay rise? This country has failed on every metric. And especially our major cities. I've just come to London now. I made it very clear to my private jet pilot. I said, fuel the jet and leave it running, because the second I'm finished talking to peers, I'm leaving this cesspit. It's disgusting. This country, and London as a whole, 10 years ago, was one of the most hospitable cities on earth. Now you cannot walk around safely with a watch on. And you're a full-grown man. You're a full-grown adult. When's the last time there's been a serious problem in your life that you completely ignored and it fixed itself? Never, ever. What are any of our politicians doing to fix any of the problems we're genuinely facing?
Well, I saw today that Sadiq Khan is planning to run again for the third term of office as mayor. All I can say is everyone I know who's had any experience of crime at any level in London in the last few years has had a bad experience of it, of the way it's been handled. You know, I mean, I can give an example. I can reveal this now. I've talked for 18 months. I got a specific death threat on one of my son's Instagram pages in public, a public comment. And it was very specific about what this person was going to do. Yeah. I couldn't use the police to evade him. We know where you live. We're going to come and kill you. And then a second one threatening my son and his mother, my ex-wife. I called in the police. I thought, I'm not having them putting death threats on my son's thing.
Sure.
I called the police. Police investigated this. They arrested somebody over a year ago. And then I heard from the police this week that despite 18 months of investigation, of a publicly posted comment on Instagram threatening to kill me on my son's Instagram, that they will not be able to pursue the case. Now, and I thought, imagine, I'm high profile. This was a front page of the Sun newspaper, this story.
If that same man called a transgender person the wrong pronouns, he would be in trouble.
Right.
So doesn't it just show how absolutely asinine and banal our legal system has become? That would never happen in a country like United Arab Emirates, the place I'm now residing in, Dubai, where the leadership has common sense. And I'm saying that all the leadership structures, doesn't matter if it's Labour or Conservative, across all of it in this nation have completely and utterly failed. Sadiq Khan is a loser, because when you have a city which is losing, which London is losing in all metrics across its competitive cities around the world, and you're in charge of it, by extension, you're a loser. I will tell you right now, instead of virtue signaling and giving Qatar a hard time over their religious beliefs, what we should be doing is a treaty with Qatar to build a prison deep in the desert. Make me mayor of London. We'll make a prison deep in the desert, and if you're caught with a knife or robbing someone, you can go do 25 years with one meal a day in the scorching sun. And then what we'll do is we'll put cameras there and we'll interview you once a week and broadcast that out to the nation and see if you change your mind and make people understand that this is a country that should be respected and our laws should be respected. Instead, what happens? What has Sadiq or any of the people in charge of this country actually done to fix any of our issues besides sit around and talk? Nothing. None of them have done anything, but they seem ultra concerned with finding money for proxy wars, ultra concerned with rainbow flags in another country that is uninterested in them, and their priorities are completely messed up. Of course the ambulance people are. Of course the ambulance drivers are striking. Of course the nurses are striking. Nobody cares about the most important things in this nation. It's a failing country in real time, and that's why I've left.
What about the specific allegation? By the way, I don't disagree with a lot of that, because I do think this country is in big trouble. And I do think that one of the problems is people think if they do have a crime against them, nobody cares anymore.
I know nobody cares. I have specific examples and people who I know personally. Absolutely and utterly nobody cares. I was in Harrods yesterday and someone tried to rob someone's watch in the middle of the store. I walk around with I have a security team of 6 full-grown men, plus me and my brother, 8 military-age males, all over 110 kilos, big men, just so I can walk around this city. It's absolutely unacceptable.
What about the issue of race? And I mentioned that in the context of the Harry and Meghan ongoing debate, their war with the royal family, war against the monarchy, their specific, constant referencing to the fact that they believe they were driven out of here because of racism in Britain. What do you make of that debate?
That's absolute fallacy.
And you're from a mixed race
Correct.
background yourself.
Correct. I'm from a mixed race background myself, and while we're discussing the leaders of the UK, although I do think they're doing a terrible job, it's kind of hard for Meghan to say that the UK is a racist country when the leader of the UK is darker skinned than her and the mayor of London is darker skinned than her, and I am a person who's probably darker skinned than her, and I've never experienced any kind of bigotry against myself besides the fact I'm a straight male. I'll get bigotry for that before I'll get bigotry for my skin color. I think it's just a cop-out, and her not wanting to be perspicacious and self-reflective enough to understand that she has attacked an age-old institution, and there are people who are very patriotic about that institution. And by attacking it and bringing a degree of distaste to it, there's going to be people who don't like her. And if you're a dislikable person, you can't just instantly stand up and say it's because of my skin color. It might be because of your actions and some of the things you've said.
I mean, I think there's probably no doubt she's had racism on social media because it's...
Who hasn't, Piers?
It's a cesspit.
You probably have.
Well, as I said just now, I've had death threats on social media and no one seemed to care very much.
Yeah.
But I think that's probably inarguable. My issue with what they've both been doing is if you're going to make allegations against an institution like the royal family and the monarchy, you've got to actually provide some evidence. You can't just spray gun this thing out there and say, well, somebody was racist.
Yeah, and airing dirty laundry is never going to be respected by the populace, and being a tattletale is never going to be respected by the populace. And I think the problem with the modern world we're living in is a lot of age-old traditions are being destroyed in real time. It doesn't matter what the tradition is. Most of them are being eroded. And something like the British royal family, which has been around for a very long time, is an age-old tradition. One of the things holding the UK together, one of the last things we have, to sit and detriment it and to sit and insult it and to give away secrets from inside of it and try and paint a negative image of it is going to upset a lot of people. And you have to be prepared for that backlash. You can't say, I've done things that upset people, but it's nothing to do with what I've done. It's purely because of my skin color. Also, it's kind of ironic that she's doing that because she's not particularly dark-skinned. It's kind of funny to watch her sit and say,
yeah,
race.
I think the truth is, I don't know what... Look, you can say that. I can't. The reality of it is, I just don't know what the specifics of the racism she says she's had because we've not seen any evidence.
The universe is a funny place, Piers. If you're looking for something, you're going to find it, right? When I got cancelled, when they attacked me unfairly, lied about me across the entire mainstream media, deleted me from social media so I couldn't defend myself, and lied about me repeatedly, I could have stood up and said, it's because I'm brown. I didn't do that. I sat and said, okay, there's people who misunderstand my message. My message is a positive one. People misunderstand me. Let me self-reflect and understand that, yes, perhaps this said a long time ago was said in the wrong way. Perhaps this was misunderstood. Perhaps people don't understand this. I could have just copped out and could have just been refusing to self-reflect on any level and said, it's because I'm brown, that's why they did it. But that's not the mature way to be as an adult.
What did you think of the Jeremy Clarkson furore where he wrote what I think most people, but including him belatedly after he'd published it and written the column, he did make an analogy from a Game of Thrones scene, which most people, I think, did find crossed a line and was deeply offensive. I think it crossed a line. What do you think?
Yeah, I understand why people feel that. But when you attack an institution as old as the British royal family, you're attacking patriotism in and of itself for one of the most respected countries or previously most respected countries on earth, and you're going to have some visceral reactions. Perhaps Jeremy Clarkson is too famous and too well-renowned to say those kind of things, but there's a lot of people who genuinely feel that way, and that's why he said it. And this is what happens when you attack age-old institutions in any country.
Should he have apologised?
That's a good question. It looks like he did. Personally, I think as a man, you should stand up, say what you mean what you say. I don't think you should ever apologize for anything you've ever said. Even me.
What if you say something truly very offensive and you actually do regret it?
If you truly regret it, then yeah, okay, you can apologize. But if at the time you meant it, then the best thing you can do is say, look, I have just changed my mind. I no longer feel that way. But at the time, that's how I felt. And I'm the person who says what he feels. And that's what I felt at the time. And I apologize that offended you.
From here in Doha, Qatar at the World Cup, Richard Keys and Andy Gray were the famous faces of Sky Sports Premier League coverage for a generation. As English football became a global sensation, they became household names. But they lost it all in a notorious scandal over sexist comments made off-air about a female assistant referee, and they've since moved their careers and their lives to here in Qatar. I spoke exclusively to them earlier in their first UK TV interview in a decade since it all went down. Why did you say yes to me?
Well, it's quite simple. You're Piers Morgan, you're the governor.
I kind of like your style, for being honest.
Yeah.
Piers. You know, I think, would it be Marmite? Piers' style?
Very much, yeah. I think
and I don't like Marmite, but I quite like your style. So we had a chat, and it wasn't, as you might suspect, it wasn't a done deal when we were asked, but I kind of said to Richard, I'd like to talk to Piers.
We are, as my great friend, late great Ray Wilkins would say, we're a tad bruised.
Yeah.
And so therefore we withdrew entirely from engaging with the British media. And we've largely concentrated on the opportunity that was afforded to us here. We've had an absolute ball for a decade. The other thing that I thought you were very fair about, Piers, was your attitude towards this World Cup, the country, friends that we've made in the time that we've been here.
Let's just start with the fact the World Cup's here. You guys have lived here for the last decade. What do you make of the way that, particularly in the UK, there's been this narrative about Qatar? They shouldn't have the World Cup. It was won with corruption. There are all these problems with LGBT rights, migrant workers. But to me, these are all legitimate concerns.
Agreed.
But I also think there's been a lot of hypocrisy.
I don't remember this outcry as intense as it's been in for such a long time around Russia 4 years ago. I don't.
And that was 4 years after they invaded Crimea, right? And with exactly the same record about human rights when it comes to
LGBTQ
LGBT
rights.
and so on and so on. So I do feel there's a lot of hypocrisy.
There's a war raging in Yemen.
Right.
But my view on yes, there is a lot of hypocrisy. None of us condone what Putin has done and would wish to do as far as his excursion into the Ukraine is concerned. But I think that resonated more in Europe because white faces were being seen in distressing situations. If the colour of the face is different, it doesn't quite resonate to the same degree.
I think
as
that's a fair
unfortunate
comment.
as that is, it's true. So here we've had different wars at different times that we've had to come to terms with, and they haven't necessarily made a line of copy in the UK. So yeah, all of the things that have been mentioned, we understand, and I think the country here more than any in this part of the world understands. But I think it was you that made the point when I was listening the other week. If you accept the principle that a World Cup is coming to the Middle East, and it should, where are you going to play it if not Qatar?
Right. And by the way, for the same reason, do you then go and play it in Africa, which has many of the same issues? Do you go to India? Do you go to China? I mean,
What about 4 years from now in America?
Right,
You mentioned it in your
I made a
interview.
point. I've lived in.
Yes.
Listen, I love America.
Yeah.
I've lived there on and off for nearly 20 years. But I don't agree with some of their laws,
Yes.
gun laws, some of their state laws about abortion
Yes.
now. I wonder if people will take the high moral ground about America's laws. I doubt they will with the same ferocity they have
I don't think
here.
it'll get a mention, Piers, because again, I refer you back to what I just said about. Listen, a lot of what the criticism levelled at this country has bordered, if not has been racist. It has been shocking.
Piers, let me tell you about, you say overnight, and in all honesty, this country I live in now, there's no resemblance to the one I moved into 10 years ago.
In what way?
And in the way it has changed, its views, its laws, the kafala that used to be in here that restricted people, I think, from travelling and whatever, that's all been gone. They're modifying everything in that respect, and they are trying to move on. But as you said, they're doing it slowly, and maybe that's not to everyone's satisfaction. Maybe it's too slow.
If you were being
positive
critical,
one.
what would you say? What would be your biggest criticism?
Wow,
I think all of the issues that you
could
mentioned.
do with another couple of golf courses.
Yeah, all of those factors should be taken as seriously as they have
Yes.
been. But you can't use them to consistently, whilst change is taking place at the pace of the Qatari government. And again, you shouldn't be dictated to by the West and whatever we believe to be valuable and important in life. You have to follow this. No, it's been a slow process, perhaps in some areas too slow. But progress has been made virtually every day since we came here. And Andy's right, it's a totally different country to the one we moved to, and it's a very enjoyable place to enjoy.
Let's get to why you came here, right? So the last time many people would have seen you, if they don't watch your commentaries now, would have been when you were riding unbelievably high at Sky. Premier League was on fire. You guys were the front men for it. Life was good. You were superstars, really, of British TV, especially in football. And then bang.
Do you recognise any of that?
Yeah, just me.
I used to watch you guys. I love you guys, right? You're an integral part of my football watching life.
Yeah.
And then bang. Do you regret saying the things you said, albeit they were said privately?
Of course. Listen, yes. I questioned whether a young lady from Coventry, my hometown, would know the offside law as she made her debut.
It was a female linesman.
Yeah. I, on air, because I was not sure who her father was, actually on air as we went to the kickoff said, and we also have a female assistant, we call them these days. Good luck to her, Sian. I don't know, I may have gone to school with her dad. She's from my manor, so all the very best to her. She made a number of errors first half that I was insistent we didn't show, nor did we. She got one absolutely spot on, the goal that was scored against Liverpool, I believe. When I spoke to her the following day, she was great. She said, hey, come on. Now,
You rang her to apologise?
yes, of course.
And she accepted the apology?
She more than accepted it. She said, I expected this last week. It's just a bit of fun. Come on, Keezy. I'd never really come across that word, banter. She said, oh, come on, it's just banter. And that, I suppose, stuck in my mind. And I said, no. I said, Sian, this is really serious now. It's got a life of its own. I have to make this an official apology on behalf of myself and Andy, who's in commentary now. She went, well, right, OK, I'm waiting. So I did. And then she went, oh, by the way, couple of things first half that you didn't show. Thank goodness for that. Thank you. I said, well, we're not in that business. You know, so yes, in isolation, those my questioning whether she knew the offside law was unacceptable.
Without anybody, honestly, in sports television at the time, very few people would survive all their private conversations being made public. I don't think that's not because everyone's awful. It's because the banter that you alluded to earlier was very prevalent.
I hate, by the way, I hate that word, and I'd never, as I said, I'd never used it. But Sian said to me, I expected it last week. Oh, come on, it was only banter. And I suppose that was in my head. And at the time, when you're on the defensive, because you can't get your head around what's going on, it's an extraordinary place to be. You know, you've set the dogs on many in a different role.
Well, I've been on the receiving end too.
You've also been on the receiving end.
So I've been poached return gamekeeper.
So
I know what it's like.
It's a terrible place to be.
If you had your time again, would you have done anything different in the way you responded?
Yes.
What would you have done?
I would have accepted quicker that what people were saying to me was accurate, and I would have understood sooner that what happened shouldn't have done. But you're not in that place, and but I've said many times to friends, given the same circumstances again, of course I would have gone at things differently. But you also have to then factor in mental health, which I think people too quickly dismiss, less so now than they have. For the first time in my life, I found myself in a very difficult place. I couldn't get my head around it, Piers. It didn't at that time seem to be so significant to start the forest fire that was engulfing us.
Alluded to the fact that you had suicidal thoughts at one stage.
Yeah.
No, it was serious.
Yeah, that's serious. I mean, you talked about it. I had a wonderful life. Fortunate, lucky. I played 17 years as a footballer. It was glorious. Best years of my life.
15. You can't count the
last two were a bit iffy. I'll give you that. Yeah. Okay. And then went to work in the sport I love for a new broadcaster that was about to revolutionise football in the way it did, and had 20 years there. So I suddenly found myself in a really dark place. The house surrounded by people. And I knew I had done something wrong. Of course I did. But I couldn't compute it. And my head was gone. And if it hadn't been for my wife, I don't know what would have happened. I really don't. Rachel was amazing. Wonderful.
You were that low?
Yeah, I was close to going down the garden where I used to have a pond down at the garden with a little bottle and a few pills, and I would have nipped down. I was that bad. One day, I was that bad. Yeah. But
I mean, that's so horrific.
People who know me will probably think, yeah, you're kidding, because you're too...
No, but I can see it in your face now, even as you think about it again.
It's horrible.
It's a very emotional thing to relive for you.
Horrible. I couldn't work it out. I knew I'd done wrong, but I thought, for 2 weeks, I couldn't get out of the house. Just surrounded by press and TV cameras and crews. And amazing. Weird, really weird. But we're through it now. I am through it now.
And your family was what saved you?
Yeah, Rachel and the kids. And pals. Friends, people who... You learn who your friends are, Piers, when things like that happens to you, and I think we both did, didn't we? We both learned.
Did you know how low Andy
Yes, I was there too.
Same?
Oh.
Feeling suicidal?
Oh, Piers.
Really?
You've no idea. Mental health... He's right. You can't explain. You look back now with a clear head and you go, what? come on, what are you thinking? You know. But when you're in that place, and he's right, you couldn't. I used to have to leave my house from my back garden. I would walk to a local nursery that was close by. I got in a taxi, and I flew out here actually because Nasser Al Khalifi, who I'd worked for earlier, 2008, and he wanted me to join then. And of course I should have done, but I was too comfortable. I should have taken his offer, but didn't. So he called and said, look, nobody's talking about it out here. Why don't you come out here? But then the heat got too much, and I felt I had to back away for us because it was going to bring too much attention to this country, and they didn't need to inherit our problems at that time. So we put it on a burner. So in effect, I lost 2 jobs we lost 2 jobs in 2 weeks. One of them of our own volition. But no, it's
Do you think it was wrong that you lost your jobs?
Well,
I mean, you talked about how it made you feel.
Well, let me ask you. Can I ask you then? Can I turn that on you?
Yeah.
Because I would like to know. Do you think it was wrong we lost our jobs?
Well, it's interesting. You know, when I've looked at it all again, it feels to me like an overreaction by everybody, because I think that you made fulsome apologies. I know Karen Brady, for example, who is one of the bosses at West Ham, and when one of her players got caught kicking a cat around, horrendous video came out. She said everyone deserves second chance and forgiveness. And yet, I remember her reaction to when you two were sacked, and it was a different reaction. And I felt there was a real kind of feeding frenzy to do you in, which with hindsight now looks like it was overdone. But mainly because you didn't say this on air. And I do think that everybody, anyone who had all their private conversations put onto public domain, I'm not sure many people would survive it.
They wouldn't survive it. I mean, you've been in more green rooms probably you can count and had conversations with guests off mic, and if half of the things that you talk about were run, the people would be horrified. Private conversations are why they're called a private conversation.
Andy, who let you down most in the world of football that you would have expected to defend you when you look back?
At that time?
Yeah.
Lots of people. I wouldn't want
Are there any that stick in your mind?
I wouldn't want to name too many of them. My real friends were there, without a shadow of a doubt. And I knew who they were. I mean, Andy Townsend, we've talked about Andy, he was one of my neighbours then. And I was sitting there in the kitchen one day, just head was all over the place. The next minute, the gates opened and this motorbike, the rider comes right down the drive. He's got an extra helmet and he's under his arm. He comes screeching in, and it's Andy. Takes the hat off. He's got that. And I'm like, "What are you? Come on!" I said, "What? I'm getting you out of here." I said, "No, you're not." I was. He said, "Yeah, come on. Put this helmet on. We'll get up to the gate and then we'll do a runner." I said, "No, I can't." But that's the kind of friend that was there. But there were lots of people that I looked after, peers, in various ways and various things that I never heard from, and I've never heard from probably in 20 years. And if I had, I would tell you.
Let me ask you. I mean, have you guys? I think every bloke, right? We're all. How old are you now, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 50 next year.
Yeah, you're 50. Plus that.
How old are you guys?
I'm 65, Piers.
And
I am 67 in 2 days.
And I'm 57. I think every bloke has probably gone through a little bit of re-evaluation in recent years about what is appropriate and not appropriate in terms of how you act, what you say. Have you guys, since what happened to you, have you gone through that process?
Yes,
yourself?
and I sometimes look at what you've got to say on different matters, and I think to myself, no, Piers, come on. Because if we are to find a balance, then we have to overbalance in one direction in order to get back to the middle, because for too long men have had everything their own way, and we're looking to try and find middle ground. If we're not going to do that just by us, in my view, we've got to go here, and we have to accept a lot of the things that irritate you particularly and drag them to the centre ground, and then we might find a better balance.
Because I know the moment I announce I've done this interview, we all know what's going to happen. There'll be people on Twitter, why are you interviewing those sexist dinosaurs?
Because dinosaurs ruled the world for about 300 million years. So I'm really not
You're proud to be a dinosaur.
Very much so.
I kinda
Embrace it, Piers.
I kind of stay away from social media most of the time, Piers. I've not been a fan of it for that kind of reason. I'm too
To
old.
those who think
I'm too old to be.
To those who
picking it up.
think that's what you are, because of what happened 10 years ago, what do you say to them?
Talk to anyone who knows me. Really, I can't defend myself. It's easy to defend myself, but that would be wrong. People know me, Piers. People who have been my friends and talk to my family. Anyone who knows me, ask them. And if they turn around and say to you, yeah, he's definitely a sexist, then I would be very, very surprised. So, that's it.
If you were offered jobs again in the UK, would you go back?
I am deeply loyal to the company that I work for and with. I think there is a process at which now I would be able to, engage, yes. But there is no suggestion of that being the case. But yeah, listen, I find it extraordinary, honestly, because in life things happen for a reason, I believe. I wouldn't wish upon any, but well, I might one or two exceptions, but I wouldn't wish on the majority what we went through. But I, as a result, have lived a wonderful life here.
I mean, I feel, and I might be completely wrong here, but just from the interview you gave to the Telegraph and from just things I picked up, and even today, actually, that I think that maybe you've come to terms with what happened better, in the sense that you're ready to sort of leave it. I feel with you, Richard, correct me if I'm wrong, there's still a lot of anger about what happened.
No, I just not.
And resentment.
No, I don't think that's necessarily true. I'm very comfortable at the place we're in, but I will always carry a little bit of anger in my back pocket. And I don't think that's a bad thing. If that is to be used by way of motivation, then I'm very happy with that as well. But no, there are a number of. It's instinct, Piers. It's something that you would do. You would want to know what happened. I can't. That's how my mind is.
If you let bitterness eat you up,
No, it's not bitterness.
that in its way.
I don't think it's bitterness.
Not at all.
How would you categorise what
I would say
you feel?
it still is a back pocket full of anger.
Yeah.
That's all.
When you think about it,
Yeah, and I do for him. When I see my mate sat there, as distressed as he was talking about it, I feel protective, and then that stirs, a little bit more of me to get on the front foot, and that's how it's been.
A couple of quick football questions. I can't not ask you, given we're here at the World Cup in your backyard. But can England win the World Cup?
They can.
They can.
Will they?
That's a different question, isn't it?
They're capable.
Yeah.
What will it depend on?
Well, all sorts of things.
Harry Kane
you're a football
getting...
man. Not losing Kane would be obviously a huge
He doesn't
factor.
look fit to me.
No, his ankle looks dodgy.
If it's not England, who do you fancy? Who do you think are the standouts?
One of my favourites, a really I thought Belgium would make a real impression here.
I also think Portugal, with my old buddy Cristiano. Do you think he was right to do the interview with me?
No.
Why?
Not at this time of his career. I thought it was badly timed. I didn't think he needed to volunteer for the aggravation that it's brought him. Were I you, I would have said to him, listen, I'm very, very keen that you sit down and talk with me, but let's get you sorted out first, because we don't want to taint the legacy. We don't want you leaving Manchester United under a cloud, and there's no reason that you should.
Roy Keane left after a similar outburst on Man U TV, and he's revered.
Do you think he's tainted his legacy?
No.
At all?
I don't think a few months' problems with Eric Ten Hag and the coach he had never heard of before that Rannery, I don't think it's going to make any difference to the legacy of Ronaldo.
So you think in time Manchester United fans will say, forgive?
He remains one of the greatest players they've ever had. And in terms of
what if they have a view of Ronaldo the same as you've just suggested public do still of us? It's going to be a long time.
You know what Cristiano said to me? You're never going to please everybody, so you may as well be true to yourself.
That's true.
Anyway, guys.
Well, you see what we've done. We're now interviewing you.
You know what? It's great to see you. It's great to see you
Enjoy Qatar.
in your own.
Enjoy Qatar.
I've enjoyed my time here, and I'm glad you guys have enjoyed it. And I hope this interview goes a way to, making people realise what you've been through. And
we'll end as we started, Piers. It is kind of you to offer the invitation for us to come and talk to you. And I know one of your objectives when you took this job was to uncancel people. And if you've played a role... I think so, don't you?
I don't think you should be.
I don't know.
I don't think almost anyone should be irrevocably cancelled.
Agreed.
I'm not sure what more you can do than show remorse, say you wish you hadn't said those things, but they were said privately. A lot of other people were saying similar stuff at the time. I heard them, right, in some cases, right, in the football world. And I think that the reaction was overdone.
You're very kind to have given us this opportunity.
Good to see you guys.
Thank you.
Come on, England.
You going for a swim?
I might actually. Good to see you. The World Cup in Qatar is becoming the most entertaining, perhaps, of all time. A bit of disappointment for those who attempted to overshadow the tournament with sanctimonious virtue signalling, including memorably the Germany players who covered their mouths before their game against Japan before losing the game 2-1 and crashing out of the tournament. They were widely mocked by Japanese supporters and Qatari TV hosts who covered their mouths and waved goodbye as the Germans got the first flight home. Well, Arsenal legend Arsene Wenger, now FIFA's head of development, summed it up rather well.
And the teams as well, who were mentally ready, like Jürgen said, at the mindset to focus on competition and not on political demonstrations.
Well, I'm thrilled to be joined now by the sportscasting legend, Bob Costas, one of America's greatest sporting commentators, a veteran of a record 12 Olympic Games, winning no fewer than 28 Emmy Awards for his peerless commentary. Bob, what a treat to have you on Piers Morgan Uncensored. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Piers. Great to see you again, even from a distance.
I have one daytime Emmy, and I've never covered an Olympics, so you're slightly ahead of me, and I bow to your superiority quite willingly. This whole issue, Bob, I just couldn't think of a better person to talk to about where the line is drawn between political activism, or social justice activism for that matter, and sport, and this issue of sport washing, whether it's in golf with the live golfers and the PGA at war, whether it's what we've been seeing in Qatar at the World Cup with people saying they're going to protest, then not protesting, then being ridiculed for it. Others, like the Iranian players, making a genuinely powerful stand against oppression of their women back home. Going right back, perhaps, to Colin Kaepernick, who was, of course, the NFL player who took the knee for the first time. And the England players at this World Cup are still taking the knee in his honour, I guess, because he was the one who started it. So it's a lot of stuff going on in this area. What is your overview of political activism and sport?
I think, Piers, we have to make distinctions from one situation to another, one person to another. Just because I may agree with a general cause or issue and with the person's right to make a statement doesn't mean that I have to agree with everything they say under that banner. Colin Kaepernick is a good example. There's no question, even if some people may overstate the severity, there's no question that police reform is an important issue in the United States. And where it needs to be reformed, the burden primarily falls upon people of color in the United States. That's legitimate. But then when Colin Kaepernick subsequently says, I don't vote because the oppressors will never allow you to vote your way out of your oppression. When he said that, Barack Obama was president. I guess he didn't vote when Donald Trump ran against Hillary Clinton, and then Donald Trump became president. That's a silly and naive thing to say, even if I respect the initial point that Colin Kaepernick wanted to make. Within this year's World Cup, the Iranians not only are making a very important point, it's a courageous point to make, because heaven knows what might happen to any of them when they return home, and they're directly involved in that. Some might say that others at a safe distance, covering their mouths or whatever, are merely virtue signaling. But then it all circles back to the IOC, in their case, putting 2 Olympics in China, another one in Vladimir Putin's Russia, and FIFA now going to Qatar. As you have stated previously, and I agree with this, obviously, every nation has flaws and problems and issues and things that they need to correct and shame in their past, and maybe in some cases in an ongoing way. But then there are nations in the here and now, we're not talking about history, in the here and now that are fundamental human rights abusers. Qatar is one of those. China is certainly one of those. Putin's Russia is one of those. And these athletes will never have a platform that will draw as many eyes and make as large an impact as they do at an Olympics or at a World Cup. And it's ironic that FIFA and the IOC say, let's keep politics out of this. Please keep politics out of this. But they're the ones who put politics in it by placing these events in places like Qatar and Sochi and in Beijing. So as long as the protest, whatever it may be, is not within the match or the game itself, because people do want to watch the game or the match for its own sake, and it's very exciting. I think you undermine your own cause if you get in the way of the game itself. But surrounding the game, or for commentators in the programming that precedes the game or at halftime or post-game, then I think it's okay.
You see, well, a brilliant response, as I would have expected, and very thoughtful. and nuanced in many places. I would take issue, I think, about a couple of things you said. The main one, I think, is this. There was a lot of, I think, over-the-top virtue signalling about Qatar from the UK in particular. Not from America, interestingly. But in the UK, a lot of sort of anger built up in the very last minute about a World Cup that was awarded 12 years ago. The Middle East has never had a World Cup. If the stick to beat the Middle East on human rights is ill treatment of migrant workers and LGBT rights, for example, then you're basically saying you can't have a sports tournament in the Middle East at all, because they would all have similar issues with migrant worker treatment and outlawing LGBT rights completely in most countries. But you'd also have the same situation in Africa. You'd have the same situation in China, the same situation in vast swathes of India, of Russia, and so on. And so I think that what I would say back to you, Bob, on that point, once you start putting the moral halo on about human rights, I'm not sure you can end up with many places in the world which are clean enough to actually host, say, a World Cup. And I'll throw it back to you in this way. You and I have both actually got into trouble at different times in our careers in America, yours more successful than mine, about gun control, for example. You expressed a view about gun control when you were on air once and got a lot of blowback. I did a lot more and got a lot more blowback and got told to go back to the UK. But the next World Cup is in America, shared with Canada and Mexico. Should people be taking a strident view, for example, about gun violence in America as an issue, about abortion laws, which have just dramatically changed, which are very contentious in many other parts of the world, what America's done there? In other words, if you continue down the road of putting a halo on and deciding who is fit to host these things, I think you've got to be consistent and accept that every country, including America, including Britain, which helped America illegally invade Iraq, of course, in 2003, that we all have actually pretty big abuses, which would be quite hard to defend.
Yeah, there are matters of degree. The points you make are legitimate. And by the way, just parenthetically, as you know, my point about guns in America and as it affects athletes was to say that there is a gun culture in America, not to take issue with the fundamental idea of the Second Amendment,
right,
which is a big deal in the United States. But even if you believe in the Second Amendment, you should also be able to recognize that there's a lot of irresponsibility surrounding guns, and some of it had crossed over into sports. So that was the comment I was trying to make. But sometimes people get irrational about certain things, hear what they want to hear, and take it from there. So forgive me for that parenthetical aside.
Yeah.
I think the point you're making is legitimate, but it's a question of degree. If we're looking for a perfect nation, maybe you'd have to hold every Olympics in Switzerland,
right,
which ironically enough is where the IOC is located in Lausanne. But we're talking about degree. The United States most certainly has its problems, and athletes historically and sometimes movingly have registered their complaints and their protests about that. But Qatar, Putin's Russia, Beijing, they are fundamental human rights abusers. It's definitive about them, rather than flaws that the nations we're talking about, the United Kingdom or the UK, America, Canada, they are actively trying to address, however imperfectly, however haltingly. It's within their DNA, it's within the American Constitution to address these inequities and injustices, whereas it is the policy of the governments of Qatar and China and Putin's Russia to oppress people and engage in many cases, Russia in this case, international treachery. Did the United States make a huge mistake post 9/11 in invading Iraq? Yes, they did. But I think you could make a strong case that that is not fundamentally what the United States is about.
I mean, it's an interesting rejoinder. I mean, I would say, having been in Qatar last week, there's a lot of, I think, resentment and raised eyebrows about what they perceive to be the West's moral hypocrisy. And they feel quite strongly about it, that they've been over-demonized and the West under-demonizes itself and doesn't want to turn the same critical eye to its own moral failings. And they pointed to, like in the UK, for example, we have appalling drug abuse now in our country. It's sort of rife with drugs now. Appalling knife crime. All sorts of metrics for sort of moral degeneration, if you like, which is anathema to a lot of people in the Middle East, where the drug laws are incredibly draconian. You know, there's very little knife crime of the kind we have in the UK and so on. So it was actually being there on the ground was really quite interesting. And it's not to defend everything that they stand for, but I do think it's a commonality through the Middle East, pretty much what Qatar represents. And they believe they're representing the whole region with the World Cup. And I have to say, having been there, Bob, it was a very good atmosphere. It felt very safe. Everything was, you know, running very smoothly. And it's not like, I know the Germans ran the trains well under Hitler. It's more, I was there and they all seemed to be having a pretty good time, I have to say.
Well, the World Cup is a wonderful event. And from what I hear from a distance, it has been run smoothly, just as you say. One thing I heard repeatedly when I hosted the Olympics, I always asked the heads of the IOC when they brought them in for an interview, what is it with this seeming affinity for authoritarian nations with the IOC? And the answer always was, we feel that by holding an Olympics anywhere, it helps to spread the Olympic ideals of equality and diversity and democracy. It helps to spread those ideas. How's that working out with China? How's that working out with Putin's Russia? And we'll see if there are any reforms in Qatar or Iran. I tend to doubt it.
Right. Bob, I could talk to you all night. What I wanted to ask you before I let you go, you've interviewed so many fascinating people in the sporting world. If you could literally, if it was your last hour on Earth, which I hope won't come for a very long time, who would you, of every sportsman and woman you've ever met, who would you most like to spend that hour with? Dead or alive?
Well, if it's the one... All right, well, then you just answered the question. Dead or alive, because of my affinity for baseball, I would like to sit Babe Ruth down with Jackie Robinson. Babe Ruth was the greatest player pre-integration. Jackie Robinson is not the greatest player, although he's a great player, but he's perhaps the most significant player in the modern history of baseball. And to have them talk not only about baseball, but about the country they grew up in. Ruth at the turn of the century and Jackie Robinson in the middle of the 20th century. That's the interview I'd like to conduct.
Brilliant. I would choose Sir Donald Bradman, who statistically, Australian batsman, cricket, statistically the greatest sportsman of all time. The gap between him and the second-placed international average player was greater than the gap between 1 and 2 of any other sport in the world.
You know, I once referred to Sir Donald in a piece on HBO as the Babe Ruth of cricket.
And in fact, there's a great picture of the two of them meeting. It's a wonderful picture. Yeah, Bradman and Babe Ruth. It's an amazing picture. Bob, thank you so much for joining me. Honestly, I could talk to you all night. You're such a fascinating guy, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Piers. Hope we talk again soon.
Good to talk to you. All the best. Well, talking of teams, everyone I think by now probably knows that my team allegiance is Arsenal Football Club. So I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by the man who transformed my club from the mediocre minnows of the Premier League to the all-conquering champions, because he brought this strange guy in called Arsene Wenger, who we'd never heard of. And he'd been in Japan. We were like, he's lost his mind, this guy. But David Dein knew what he was talking about. He was the vice chairman of Arsenal. And the rest is history. Won the league 3 times in 8 years, a host of other trophies, and became the best team in the world, probably ever. And David Dein is with me now. David, great to see you.
It is.
And Nadia's kindly agreed to stay with us. David, a lot of speculation. Well, first of all, your reaction to the result tonight, England, what did you think?
Very satisfied. We started off very slowly. It was a bit of a pedestrian first half, but certainly woke up in the second half, and it was a very good, accomplished performance. And I'm delighted for the team and for all the fans.
Who would have thought that we could score 9 goals at a World Cup and Harry Kane wouldn't get any of them?
There you go. Well,
I mean, it's a good problem for Southgate to have. Everyone's banging in goals apart from the guy who normally does.
That's right. But you're only as good as your last game. You've got to keep winning.
What does Southgate do now with this team? Because now there's a lot of competition for places. He brought Phil Foden back in.
Yes.
I think after he read my column in The Sun, I'm not sure, demanding Foden start, but he was great tonight. Marcus Rashford was on fire tonight.
was,
I don't
scored a
see
couple of
how
goals.
he can drop Rashford, but he can't play Rashford, Sterling, Saka, Foden and Kane and Mount and Grealish.
Yes. Piers, we're all frustrated managers, aren't we?
Who would you put?
And I can see
who would
you
If
are.
it's Senegal in the next round we've got, right? On Sunday evening, I think.
Yeah.
Who would you put in that front five?
I'm very pleased I'm not the manager because he's got to stand up to be counted and he'll be judged on on the team's performance.
Now, what do you think? Who would you put now? If you were Gareth Southgate, obviously Kane starts, so who do you put around Kane?
That's hard. That's a
And who
very
do
hard
you drop?
decision.
Who do you ruin their World Cup?
I don't know. I think Rashford's been doing very well, so I'll choose him. And then also Saka, because I'm also Arsenal fan.
I think you've got to play Saka on the right,
There you
Foden
go.
in behind Kane, Rashford. I mean, I think, well, one of them's got him on the left. And they can't both, can they?
It's a pleasant problem to have.
Yeah.
Luxus.
It's a good problem. Let's turn to the World Cup more
Yes.
generally, because David, you've been one of the top football executives for many decades now. You know how it all works. Let's start first of all with all the noise around FIFA as an organisation. You've dealt with them over the years. How much of the criticism is justified?
Well, I think perhaps initially, certainly when the bid process went on, it was definitely flawed. There's no question about that. However, that was 12 years ago. We have to move on. We've decided to put a team into the World Cup. We've qualified, and we've got to give them the best support we possibly can. And I really feel sorry for people who haven't come out here because they're missing a lot. They're missing a phenomenal tournament. I have personally seen 15 out of the last 16 World Cups. My first World Cup was 1960.
How many have you seen?
15 out of the last out of six.
Have you really?
Since 66.
What, 4 a day you've been going to?
No, I'm talking about World Cups.
Oh,
Never
right.
mind the games.
But how many games
I'm
have you been
talking
going to
about-
here?
4 a day. I've been in heaven. I've been obviously going around with Arsenal. We've been seeing 4 games a day. Out of all the games, we've only missed 2 out of the
I
whole.
just want to interrupt because there's a man chanting, Piers Morgan is a legend, and I wouldn't like to think the cameras hadn't picked that up. So
No.
just want to make sure we got that on camera.
You sure he didn't say leg end?
So
Did you?
how many World Cups have you been to?
World Cups, I've been. The first one was 1966 at Wembley when we won it.
I was 1.
Yes.
So you went to that one?
I've been to 15 since then, missing out one in 1982 in Spain. Otherwise,
been
I've
to
seen everyone.
15 World Cups.
And Piers, out of all of them, this has to rank right at the top. This is as good, if not better, than
Really?
any other. It is
Funny enough, I saw Graham Souness this morning. He said the same thing. Best he'd been
It's
to.
been phenomenal, the whole organisation of it. You know, people are quick to criticise and slow to praise. Qatar deserve a lot of praise for the way they've put it on. Last night we went to the game at Lusail Stadium. It finished at 5-12. I was back in the hotel at 12:15. Couldn't do that at
Should
Wembley.
politics ever get involved with sport?
I don't think so, because where does it end? Sport is a sport, football is a sport, and we've got to treat it as such. And once you start introducing politics, we're in trouble because we could have 32 countries here with different political messages. Where does it end?
All of which have their own problems.
And, you know, FIFA do deserve some credit. And I think Gianni Infantino, particularly the president, obviously, everybody gets... It's easy to criticise somebody, but it's been a magnificent World Cup. You can't ever... I mean, the accommodation's been great. The transport has been
What did
wonderful.
you... I mean, look, I think the problem it felt to me was that press conference he gave, where he slightly over-egged the souffle. He went on a bit too passionately.
Yeah.
And when he began telling everybody, I'm gay, I'm Arabic, and I'm everything else,
he
I was
was-
like, where's this going to finish? He's like, he seemed to be everything.
But don't forget, he's been a bit hammered by certain members of the press.
Sure.
I don't think you're amongst that lot, are you, Piers?
What did you make of it, Noddy? I mean, it's a hard job running FIFA, but I knew what he was trying to say. He was trying to say, look, there's a lot of hypocrisy, which I think there is. I've been on this myself. But he probably slightly overdid it.
Yeah, definitely. I think, I don't think he knows how it feels to truly be in someone else's shoes that way. He always explained that. But I think his message was kind of that we should be a bit more tolerant, and football is the beautiful game that can unite, it's for everyone, this region deserves also to experience World Cup, and I think it's going to do great things for the region, not only for Qatar.
You've had a bit of criticism back home.
Yeah.
Everybody who seems to come in, I got criticised for coming. I was like, I don't care whether you think I should not. I've been in the Middle East a lot in my life. I like the Middle East. I like the people here. I think they deserve a bit more respect for what they're doing here. And that doesn't mean you ignore the areas where they could certainly be improving. But I don't think England's in any great shape to extol their moral virtue on other countries. What do you think of this argument about the morality of it all?
Honestly, as you said, to be honest, I don't really understand it. For me, this was the decision that was been taken 12 years ago. And now that we're here, we should try to make the best out of it. I think there's problems everywhere. And trying to highlight one thing extremely for so long time, I think is a bit too much. What I see in it is that football is a great tool to bring change, to educate, to improve. Just the fact that we're sitting here talking about what could be better, that's a change. You
could spin any of these numbers. There are so many millions of migrants, 2.5 million migrants here. How many countries would allow 90-odd% of their population to be migrants, right? And they come here to earn more money than they could from the countries they come from in almost every case. Yes, there have been a number of deaths. Yes, those should be investigated. Yes, the conditions have had to be improved. So therefore, that's an admission things weren't as good as they should be. But I was speaking to some women yesterday, Qatari women. Everyone in Qatar gets free education, for example. I didn't know that. They said there's gender pay equality throughout all official bodies, including the government.
Yeah.
And so on and so on. It's not quite how people maybe in Denmark or England think it is here.
No, I don't think that's correct exactly. I think some of the Western media has been taking one thing and kind of spinning it. And a lot of people that come here, they say, well, I was imagining something totally differently. And then to be very frank, it's not because I'm trying to build paint your picture. Does not. But I'm just, whether it deserves credit, you should give it. And for me, this World Cup so far has been brilliant.
David, putting on a World Cup is an unbelievably difficult thing. And I think we can all agree that so far it's run very, very well. No traffic problems. The stadiums are out of this world. If you want a drink, you can get one very easily in restaurants and bars all over the town, hotels. There's no real problem with that. I personally rather like the fact the fans can't all get drunk inside the stadiums, because I was at the Wembley Euros final last year, and frankly, it was a complete disgrace.
Yeah, I agree with you. And the capacity, they're running now at 97% capacity, so virtually every stadium is full every game.
Well, that atmosphere tonight, America-Iran, was probably the best atmosphere so far.
There you go. Well, I thought Argentina-Mexico was really red. I mean, that was wonderful. And nearly 90,000 people, and a lot of the Argentinian fans, the Mexican fans, were side by side. And I mean, for FIFA, this has been a phenomenal success. It really has.
What about the allegations which have swirled around FIFA for decades of corruption? You know all these people.
Yeah.
We know that a lot of them have been caught with their fingers in the till. So the corruption has clearly been real and clearly been going on. Should FIFA go through a wholesale reformation, do you think?
Well, no, but I think in fairness, when Gianni Infantino, don't forget, he inherited that mess. And to his great credit, I think he's actually cleaned up the shop. So I think he deserves something for that, for the way FIFA currently being run. Of course, everybody's going to be critical. He's got 211 mouths to feed. Not everybody's going to be satisfied. That goes with the territory.
I mean, there's huge money in a World Cup, and where there's huge money, there's always corruption of some sort.
Piers, we can be cynical, but meanwhile, this tournament will gross something like $7 billion, right? You've got to say that is a huge success. It's wonderful. And it all gets recycled back into football around the world.
I certainly think, Nadim, you're walking around Qatar. I know you've had to sadly to leave to be at your mother's funeral, but I've been here for 5 days now, just walking around and milling around with regular fans from all around the world. You get a sense of the scale of a World Cup, the sheer volume of countries, supporters, walking around with flags and everything. Secondly, a lot of happiness, no real incidents, no fighting, no vomiting in the street. I mean, it's been feels like a very safe and happy event to me.
Yeah, definitely. I've been enjoying it. As you said, the atmosphere, the vibe is very, very nice, pleasant, safe. The fans are enjoying themselves. The fan zones are full. I've been a couple of times to, fan festival.
What's it been like to be a woman in Qatar for you?
I mean, for me, it's been the same as it is everywhere. I felt safe, like in the US and Europe. As I said, it's very hard to point fingers if you haven't really experienced it yourself. And this is a way for us to educate. I think football has that power to educate. See, because you read something or you heard something without actually being
Also,
there.
for you
experience
coming
it.
from Afghanistan, where you were deprived in education by
Yeah.
the Taliban, and now millions of young girls in Afghanistan are once again being deprived in education by the Taliban. To come to a country like Qatar, which is a small country, but where education is free for all, including all girls, I mean, that's not a thing to turn our noses up at.
No, I think that's amazing. I think that's a great example to set. That should be a norm anywhere, free education. But unfortunately, that's
David,
not the case.
who is going to win the World Cup? Come on, you know your football.
Well, I think Nadia wasn't far wrong when I think you went for Brazil.
Brazil, they're my
But
team.
it's Argentina.
I think France won't be too far away.
I don't think Portugal will be far away.
They won't be.
They look good.
And I have to tell you, yesterday was one. I mean, we're seeing. I'm going around a lot with Arsene. We're seeing 4 games a day. And yesterday, after the Ghana game, where they were playing Korean, it was a wonderful game of football.
Yeah.
We were coming to Lusail for the 4th game. I said to Arsene, "Are you ready for another game?" He said, "I'm ready for 2." This will be unique. You will not see another World Cup with 4 games.
Can
a day.
England win it? Put your neck out.
If we win all the next games, we can win it.
Wow.
I think we can beat Senegal. Then we're in the quarterfinals, right?
Then who knows?
Anything can happen in a World Cup. You've been there. You've been in the European final.
Yeah. Anything can happen. That's football,
Yeah. Listen, thank you, particularly for coming back
course.
to the World Cup. That takes a lot of guts, and I send my very best to you and all your family as well. And I can see the spirit of both your father and your mother in you. Well, that
Appreciate it.
ever having
Thank
met
you.
them, but knowing what they did, I can see it in you. So thank you very much.
Thank you for
And
having
David,
me.
great to see you.
As always.
I bet you better get your bed, because presumably you're off to another 4 games tomorrow, are you?
Well, only 2, I'm afraid. We can't do 4. But I'll be at
Final
both
question
of
for you. Arsenal 5 points clear of the Premier League. Is it coming back? Are we going to win the league this season?
I think we have a decent chance because everybody can beat everybody this year.
Do we need to buy a top striker in
I
January?
think they have to be bold in the transfer market in January.
And get the big checkbook out.
Would be my advice.
What about Cristiano Ronaldo?
I'm not going to comment on
Put him up front with Jesus. Then you'd have God and Jesus. That's a good combination.
that. That's a good one. I wish I'd have thought of that.
You don't hold accountability to my pain. You're being a Karen.
I'm talking
You
about.
don't
I'm
hold
talking. I'm not a
accountability
Karen.
to
and
the
I'm,
pain.
I'm not a Karen, and I'm not going to cancel you, and I'm not going to uncensor you. I'm simply going to challenge you on what you're saying.
you can't-
I think
you
you
can't
don't
cancel me.
understand the pain that you've been causing with some of these comments, and I think that one in particular, I can
Oh my
understand.
God. God forbid, one comment could cause people to feel any of the pain that my people have went through for years. Even like the blacks being ushered to the left during the civil rights movement. No
why-
one has cared
why does
about
he-
black
why does he-
people.
okay, why
no,
does-
no,
all right.
No one is.
Let me say, I agree that the racism against black people has been utterly deplorable, shameful, unacceptable, and thank God the world is beginning to move to a better place about the way
what
it
about-
has treated
okay,
black
what
people
about-
like you. However,
It's-
one form of racism here
No,
doesn't
it's
justify.
almost in a better place.
Well,
But you
one
see,
form of
the way
racism
you're
doesn't
cutting me
justify
off
another.
is not a better
I'm
place.
not cutting you off. I'm finishing my sentence so you can respond. One
It's
form
not-
of racism.
it's not-
one
it's
form
not
of
racism.
It is racism when you say I'm going
So
DEFCON for
clarify the
Jewish
truth.
people.
I was in a position where I've been hurt, and this is the way I had the right to express myself. The point of this interview is for you to question me, and then for me to answer and say, okay, even though the same rules are not applied to my people, if a person with a gun or drugs is pulled over and has 3 other people in the car, they're all going to jail. I'm not going to apply that to Jewish people for the sake of this conversation. Isn't that what you wanted? But you know what you did? You tried to civil rights me. You tried to pull me back to a week ago. But we're here today. There's been plenty of conversations and commentary since that. But you want me to go back to 1960.
No. Here's
you
what
want me to go back to 7 days ago.
All right, let me jump in. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to reflect.
Okay, so have we grown? Have we grown?
Here's how we
Have
grow. Yeah, here's how we grow. I want you to reflect.
No, have we grown?
I'm about
have
to.
we grown?
I'm
You're
about.
not in charge of my growth. You're not in charge of
I'm
my
about
growth,
to.
Chris.
Okay,
Like,
let
how
me
we
phrase
grow.
it like this. I'm about to suggest to you how you may grow if you choose to grow this way. And you
Why-
can ignore me. You can ignore me.
Pierce, Pierce, how much money are you worth?
Not as much as you, sadly.
Exactly. So take my advice. Maybe you'll get richer.
I would love to take your business advice.
Why would I listen to you?
Well, why don't you hear what my advice is and then work out if I'm wrong? Can we do that deal?
Well, the thing is, you haven't given me any credit or a moment of reflection for the comparison that I made, the brilliant, if I do say so myself, comparison that I made to the cops pulling over one black person and locking everyone up.
I understand what you're saying.
And my tweet having issues. Wait a second, I wasn't done with the sentence. My tweet referring to all Jewish people, I said, for the sake of this conversation, I will refer to the business people who have destroyed me and my people and my fellow creatives. But you didn't even accept that I gave you that. You tried to push me back into 1960.
No, I didn't.
You tried to push me back into last week.
No, I didn't.
Okay, do you accept that example that I gave you?
I understand completely the example you gave me. I think all racism is wrong.
So I feel that we've grown.
I would like you to reflect.
I feel we've grown.
If
Do you feel we've grown?
If you've now changed what you wanted to say originally, my question for you is, do you now regret saying DEFCON 3 on Jewish people? Are you sorry you said that?
No.
I think it matters. You should be.
Absolutely not. You know, I will say I'm sorry for the people that I hurt with the DEFCON, the confusion that I call. I feel like I cause hurt and confusion. And I'm sorry for the families of the people that had nothing to do with the trauma that I had been through, and that I use my platform where you say hurt people. And I was hurt. Yeah.
It's an uncensored interview. You said something which you've now wished you hadn't said, and you've apologized. I actually think that says a lot about you, right? That shows you've got that ability to be self-aware, to understand when you cross a line. I think someone like you, with all your energy and creativity and your passion, you're going to say stuff. The way that you talk constantly and in such an extraordinary manner, you're going to trip up. You're going to say things the wrong way. I don't think there's anything wrong in when you do that, doing what you just did and saying, look, I'm sorry, I crossed a line, I apologize.
I want to say that it's wrong to hold an apology hostage, and I got to let go of that and free myself of the trauma and say, look, I'm just going to give it all up to God right now. And say to those families that are hurt, I really want to give you guys a big hug. And I want to, I say, I'm sorry for hurting you with my comments. And I want to word it in not in like a political way, but in a presidential way, which means what I knew a president to be when I was growing up.
Well, ladies, I'm sure you're all familiar with the so-called repeating. This is this thing where a man takes a woman's idea and then takes all the credit for it. It's not a new phenomenon. Take a look at this Punch cartoon from 1988. You get the drift. Basically, the only good ideas come from men. This week, staff at UK exam regulator Ofqual have reportedly been warned to avoid repeating. So, what is it? And does it exist? Well, with me now, socialist author Grace Blakely and political pundit and journalist Russell Quirk. So it seems to me, Grace, that repeating is where, for example, you would have a good idea that you espouse right now, and I would go, yeah, you know what? And then I would repeat the idea and basically assume it is my own. Does this really happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think most women who've been in a professional environment have experienced this at one point or another. This kind of thing of you will pop up with something in a meeting, you'll, have a good idea, say, oh, maybe we should do this, maybe we should focus on this topic, and then someone else will say exactly the same thing and get all the credit. It comes alongside, I think, being interrupted. Now, I don't know if there's any empirical evidence of heap-eating, but there's plenty of empirical evidence that men interrupt women a lot more than they interrupt other men, and I think it's basically a similar sort of category.
And you think we mansplain and all the rest of it?
Occasionally, yeah.
You see, Russell, my argument about this would be that a strong woman just doesn't take any of this stuff. Well, when I worked with Susanna Reid at Good Morning Britain, she wouldn't accept me mansplaining or interrupting or any of these things, and she would never dare suggest publicly that I was repeating because it would make her look so weak.
Well, I don't know any women that would tolerate this, and I've certainly never been in any situation where I've seen it. I've seen plenty of situations where it's worked the other way around, and certainly where men have repeated and taken the credit for other men, edicts and suggestions. But frankly, Piers, I think we're getting a little bit sick of this. I'm feeling actually quite oppressed as a male, where every single social situation seems to be turned into something that is turned against men, as if men are always the bad guys.
Well, I thought the idea for me, to be honest with you, Grace, was last week it emerged that there's fury over the latest sexism row, which is not enough female scientists are named after parasitic worms. Only 18% of parasitic worms have female scientists names.
Look,
and I'm like, of all the hills to die on, really?
Who did that research?
You want to be named after parasitic worms?
The reason, funnily enough, that a lot of these issues end up taking up so much of our political conversation is because, actually, to be fair, a lot of the conversation around feminism is dominated by relatively privileged women who are in these contexts. What we should be talking about, in my opinion, as feminists, are things like women bore the brunt of austerity. Women have borne the brunt of the economic impact of the pandemic. Women are bearing the brunt of the cost of living crisis.
More men than women died from COVID.
More men than women died, but I said the economic impact. So women were more likely to work in
but death
service.
is probably the ultimate.
Of course.
So why are you not mentioning that? See,
when we're thinking about things that we can do in response to the pandemic,
but you take a pandemic and you say, we had it worse.
Well, I'm not saying we had it worse.
And in fact, more men died, significantly more men died.
I'm saying that when you have economic crises, women bear the brunt, right? That's not necessarily always the case with all these other crises, with the health impact or whatever, but women are carrying the burden of really just like long-term economic stagnation in this country.
I realise I both interrupted you and mansplained. So
that's fine. I'm used to it because I'm strong.
Could it be, Russell, that we just do this without even realising? I mean, I can imagine the tweets now going, well, you were literally just doing it.
Everybody does this. Everybody does it. And it's not a gender-specific thing. And frankly, I think trying to call out all of these things as gender-specific really does this kind of equality and this diversity cause no good at all.
It is exhausting.
But the fact we're sitting here talking about it means it then becomes divisive.
I think there's an issue here as well with, like, you both said, oh, women who are strong don't let this happen, right? And that is in itself a problem because it's this, like, macho definition of strength,
men aren't strong.
Which is like, oh, if you shout over everyone else, then you're strong.
Yeah, but if women
like, I
like
can
you,
do that. I can shout over everyone else, but not everyone, male or female, is going to be like that. And actually, if everyone was
like us, I would say more women,
the world would fall apart.
Yeah,
we would have a conversation.
My response would then be more people should be like you. More
but then
women
no one would be able to have a conversation if we were all shouting over each other all the time.
We're doing it now, but there are as many men that are weak as there are women
that are weak.
Okay, it's not gender-specific.
Not to, like, shout over everyone all the time.
I now have to shut you up because we've run out of time.
Someone
it's an interesting debate. I think you're talking evidence that this doesn't exist. It's a phenomenon invented by weak people. But thank you, Grace, and thank you, Russell.